What would you do if one morning you opened your front door, picked up the mail, and saw a letter telling you that the place where your parents were married, where your kids learned to fish, and where you scatter your thoughts on quiet evenings, had to be destroyed in 30 days?
What if the letter said your family's old wooden dock was non-compliant?
A safety hazard. And if you didn't tear it out, you'd pay $100 a day in fines until you obeyed. That was the morning my fight with the Homeowners Association truly began. My name is Daniel Miller. I am 52 years old, a high school history teacher by trade, a carpenter on weekends, and the third generation of my family to live on this little patch of land along Willow Lake, Wisconsin. When I was a boy, my grandfather used to call this place God's porch. Pines crowd the shore, loons call in the morning mist, and when the sun sets just right, the water looks like melted copper. But the crown of our property wasn't the cabin itself. It was the dock. My grandfather built it in 1949, plank by plank, with help from my grandmother handing him nails. He didn't own power tools, just a hammer, a saw, and stubborn hands. My father taught me how to tie knots on that dock. My mother canned tomatoes while keeping an eye on us from the porch, always ready to shout if we wandered too close to the deep end. Years later, I asked my wife, Sarah, to marry me right at the edge. Lanterns glowing, stars overhead. She laughed through tears and said yes. That dock wasn't wood, it was memory. For decades, the community around Willow Lake was loose, friendly, and quiet. People waved when they passed each other on the gravel road. If a storm knocked a tree across your driveway, someone showed up with a chainsaw before you had a chance to complain. We had no written rules. Only neighborly ones: keep your dog leashed. Don't dump trash. And if you borrow a ladder, return it with thanks. Then came the change. A developer from the city bought up empty lots around the lake, paved roads, built big houses with glass walls, and called it Willow Lake Preserve. With the new homes came glossy brochures, sales pitches about exclusive lakeside living, and, of course, a homeowners association. At first, it was small things. The HOA sent notices about lawn height, mailbox paint, and unsightly storage sheds. Annoying, but survivable. But then came the new president. Her name Margaret, though. Most folks started whispering Queen Margaret before long. Early 40s. Sharp suits. Big SUV that barely fit the narrow roads. She had a voice like polished glass, smooth until it cut you. She and her husband, a lawyer from Chicago, bought one of the biggest houses, then pushed hard for standards. Within months, she was HOA president, chairing meetings with a gavel like she was presiding over Congress. And the first target of her reign, my dock. The violation letter was written in perfect legalese. Structure identified. Non-compliant dock. Findings: unapproved materials, non-uniform appearance, and aesthetic inconsistency with Willow Lake Preserve guidelines. Directive remove within 30 days or fines will accrue at a rate of $100 per day. I held that paper in my hand and felt like somebody had insulted my grandfather to my face. I walked down to the dock, touched the sun-warmed cedar, and muttered, "Over my dead body." At the appeal hearing, I laid everything out. I showed photographs of my grandfather building the dock in 1949. I produced maintenance logs I'd kept for years, noting every board I replaced, every bracket I reinforced. I even had a letter from a retired civil engineer, an old family friend, confirming the structure was safe. Margaret listened with that thin smile of hers. then cleared her throat. We appreciate your sentiment, Mr. Miller. But the dock simply doesn't align with our vision for the community. We've retained a professional inspection, and it shows serious risks. I looked down at the inspection and nearly laughed. It came from a company called Lakeshore Safety Solutions, registered owner Margaret's brother-in-law. The board voted unanimous. Tear it out or pay. I walked out of that meeting shaking with rage. That night, sitting on the dock with Sarah, I said, "They don't get to erase our history." She squeezed my hand. "Then don't let them." That was the moment I decided I was done playing defense. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one armed, not with fists, but with facts, persistence, and the truth. The next morning, I drove into town with a thermos of strong coffee and planted myself at the county clerk's office. If there's one thing my years as a history teacher taught me, it's that the truth usually hides in dusty records nobody else bothers to read. I started with property plats, digging through yellowed pages and microfilm, and there it was, a 1949 permit authorizing my grandfather's dock, stamped, signed, and filed before Margaret was even born. Even better, a note on the margin said grandfathered structure, in legal language. That meant it was exempt from future regulations unless it was abandoned or unsafe. I didn't stop there. I combed through the HOA's bylaws. A booklet thicker than a Bible, buried deep in Article 11. Section 2 was a clause. Legacy structures existing prior to the formation of Willow Lake Preserve shall be exempt from aesthetic conformity requirements, provided they do not pose imminent danger. Imminent danger. My dock had survived 70 winters, 3 floods, and a tornado that ripped roofs clean off houses. It wasn't going anywhere. By the time I left that office, my binder was fat with copies, permits, and highlighted passages. At the next HOA meeting, Margaret strutted in wearing a tailored blazer, confident as ever. When my turn came, I slid the binder onto the table. "This dock," I said, tapping the photo of my grandfather with a hammer in 1949, "was built before this HOA existed. I have the original permit. I have maintenance logs. And here I pointed to the highlighted bylaw. Your own rules exempt it." The room stirred. A few neighbors leaned in, whispering. Even some who usually sided with Margaret shifted in their seats. Her smile flickered. "Mr. Miller, while we respect your passion, this structure remains inconsistent with community aesthetics. Furthermore, we have an expert report from your brother-in-law." I interrupted, holding up the page. "Conflict of interest much?" Gasps scattered through the room. Margaret's eyes narrowed to slits. "The board has voted. The directive stands." I gathered my papers, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "This isn't over." That week, the harassment began. I got notices claiming my lawn was too long when I'd mowed it the day before, fines for leaving a canoe visible by the shoreline, a warning about my firewood stack being improperly arranged. Petty nonsense. One after another. Like mosquitoes you can't swat fast enough. One night, Sarah shook her head as we opened yet another envelope. "They're trying to wear us down." "Yeah," I muttered, tossing it onto the growing pile. "But I've got more stubbornness than they've got paper." Then came the scare. One Saturday evening, I walked down to the dock and noticed fresh gouges on one of the support posts. Marks too clean to be weather. I crouched down with a flashlight and my stomach dropped saw cuts. Someone had tried to weaken the structure. I stormed back up the path, fury burning in my chest. Sabotage wasn't just harassment, it was dangerous. If a kid had been on the dock when it gave way, I don't even want to think about it. I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Harris came out. Tall and tired looking. Taking photos. "You got enemies?" he asked. I laughed bitterly. "How long you got?" He shook his head. "We'll look into it. But unless we catch someone in the act," his voice trailed off. That night, I set up cameras, 2 pointed at the dock, 1 at the driveway. If they came back, I'd be ready. Meanwhile, neighbors started whispering their own frustrations. Walt, who lived 2 doors down, confided that he'd been fined for a shed built in the 1970s. Mrs. Hernandez got cited because her grandson's bike leaned against the porch. Even newcomers, the folks Margaret thought she had wrapped around her finger, started grumbling. One evening, over coffee on my porch, Walt said, "This isn't just about your dock. Dan, she's squeezing everyone. We need to push back together." That's when the idea of a recall started to form. We met quietly at first, a handful of us in living rooms, sharing stories and comparing violation letters. It felt almost rebellious, like plotting under the noses of kings. We discovered patterns, fines that weren't logged properly, consulting fees funneled to Margaret's relatives, decisions made without quorum. "Looks like corruption to me," Mrs. Hernandez said, slapping one of the papers. "Looks like we have enough to call for a recall," I replied. We needed signatures from at least 51% of homeowners. It sounded impossible until we started knocking on doors. That summer was a blur of conversations. I must have stood on 30 porches, binder in hand, telling the story of the dock, the sabotage, the harassment. Some folks were hesitant, scared Margaret would retaliate. But others, tired of the nonsense, signed eagerly. By mid-July, we had the numbers. When we submitted the petition, Margaret exploded. She called it illegal, claimed outside agitators had misled people. But the bylaws were clear with enough signatures. A recall election had to be held. The date was set for August. The night before the vote, I walked down to the dock with Sarah. The lake was calm, moonlight shimmering across the boards. "What if we lose?" I asked quietly. She squeezed my hand. "Then we keep fighting." "But I don't think we will." I looked out at the water, remembering my grandfather's hammer, my father's calloused hands, my own proposal to Sarah. And I thought, this dock has survived storms, ice, and sabotage. 60 money said, tomorrow, it'll survive politics too. Election day dawned, hot and heavy. The kind of Wisconsin summer morning where the air feels like syrup. Folks filed into the Willow Lake Community Center. Some with tight lips, some chatting nervously, some pretending like it was any ordinary Saturday. But everyone knew it wasn't. The recall ballots sat stacked on a folding table, manned by 3 volunteers who'd insisted on doing things by the book. Clipboards, sign-in sheets, envelopes sealed with tape. I stood at the back of the room, binder under my arm, heart pounding like I was about to take a final exam. Margaret arrived late, sweeping through the doorway in a crisp white blazer. Her husband trailed behind, face set like stone. She didn't look left or right, just marched to the front row and sat with her chin high. The voting itself was quiet. Neighbors took their papers, marked their choices, dropped them in the box. Some glanced at me, gave small nods. Others avoided my eyes. The room buzzed with whispered conversations. When the last ballot was cast, the volunteers carried the box to a side table. They counted aloud. Each paper lifted carefully. I swear the air was so thick with tension you could have cut it with a butter knife. Finally, the lead volunteer cleared her throat. 74 in favor of recall. 21 against. For a second, silence. Then applause erupted. Loud and sharp, echoing off the community center walls. People stood, clapped, cheered. Walt let out a whistle so piercing even the rafters seemed to cheer back. Margaret didn't move. She just sat, face pale, lips pressed tight. Then she gathered her purse. I stood and hissed, "You'll regret this," before storming out. I watched her go. Binder still clutched to my chest. Relief washed over me like cool lake water on a blistering day. For the first time in months, I felt hope. But victory didn't mean the war was over. 2 weeks later, I got another letter in the mail, not from the HOA this time, but from Margaret's lawyer. She was suing me personally for defamation and emotional distress. I nearly choked on my coffee. Rebecca, the attorney who'd been helping us, flipped through the pages and laughed. "This is smoke. Dan, empty threats. She's trying to scare you into silence. Feels like more than smoke," I muttered, staring at the legal jargon. She patted the stack. "Trust me, the judge will toss it." And she was right. The case lasted one hearing. The judge read through, frowned, and said, "This is without merit. Dismissed." I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter, but I also knew Margaret wasn't finished. She was too bitter, too prideful to let it end there. Sure enough, harassment took new forms. Fake social media accounts popped up, posting photos of my property with captions like "unsafe eyesore" and "negligent homeowner endangering kids." Same accounts conveniently praised Margaret as a visionary leader. Then came the sabotage attempt. It was late one evening when the security camera pinged my phone. I opened the app and froze two hooded figures crouched near the dock with a cordless saw. My heart nearly exploded out of my chest. I grabbed my flashlight and shouted through the night, "Hey!" They bolted, the saw clattering to the ground. The camera caught enough their truck, their license plate. Deputy Harris traced the vehicle back to a landscaping company Margaret had used before. Charges were filed. She denied involvement, of course, but everyone in town put two and two together. After that, the whispers turned into open talk. People who'd once sided with her began crossing the street to shake my hand. Meanwhile, life around the lake kept proving my point. Marcus, the biologist, presented fresh data, clearer water, more frogs, stronger fish. "This is the healthiest Willow Lake has been in decades," he told the crowd at the library. The new board voted unanimously to recognize the dock as a community heritage structure. They even organized a small dedication ceremony. I stood on the dock that evening. Neighbors gathered around, kids tossing pebbles into the water. The board unveiled a little bronze plaque. "Miller Dock, built 1949. Preserved for community and history." Applause. Cheers. Even a few tears. Sarah squeezed my hand and whispered, "He'd be proud." She meant my grandfather. I looked at that plaque, at the lake shimmering in the sunset, and thought we did it. But like storms rolling in over calm water, peace never lasts long. One night in October, Walt banged on my door. "Dan, you better come quick." We hurried to the dam. The chain on the service gate had been cut. Someone had tried to tamper with the water level. If they'd succeeded, they could have flooded the channel, or worse, damaged the dock permanently. My blood ran cold. They're desperate, Walt muttered, and desperate folks are dangerous. He was right. The fight wasn't over, not yet. The sheriff's office treated the cut chain at the dam seriously. Deputy Harris crouched low with his flashlight, shaking his head as he studied the clean bite marks. This wasn't kids messing around, he said. Somebody brought the right tool for the job. Which means it was planned, I replied, the anger in my voice sharper than I intended. He nodded. You and your neighbors need to be careful. Whoever did this wanted to make a point. I didn't need him to spell it out. We all knew who had the motive. Over the next few weeks, the community drew closer. Walt built a temporary wooden gate across the dam access road, reinforced with a padlock the size of my fist. Carla, our new HOA chairwoman, set up a neighborhood watch schedule. Neighbors who used to barely wave at each other were suddenly sharing coffee in the cold night air, standing guard with flashlights. And you know what? For the first time, I realized this fight was bigger than me. Bigger than my dock. It was about neighbors remembering how to look out for one another. Margaret's iron-fisted rule had scared us into silence, but her downfall was making us into a real community again. Then came the storm. In late October, a nor'easter slammed into Wisconsin. The wind howled like a freight train. Rain fell in sheets, and the lake rose so high it swallowed half the shoreline. Sarah and I sat by the fire that night, listening to shingles peel off roofs. The next morning, I trudged down to the dock with my heart in my throat. I expected to see wreckage, but there it stood, solid, stubborn, defiant. The planks were slick, the rails worn, but every bolt I'd tightened over the years held true. The dock had survived yet another test nature threw its way. And when neighbors gathered that afternoon to check on each other, they saw it too. Guess your old dock's tougher than any of those new aluminum contraptions. Walt chuckled, pointing to a collapsed pier down the shoreline. Even skeptics couldn't deny it. The so-called hazard had outlasted shiny, modern builds. That storm gave me more credibility than 1,000 words at a meeting ever could. But Margaret wasn't done. The following week, she filed an environmental complaint with the State Department of Natural Resources. Claimed my dock was leaching contaminants. Claimed the lake lowering was catastrophic to wildlife. It might have worked except Marcus, the biologist, stepped up. He delivered reports, charts, even drone photos showing thriving fish beds, frogs returning, and water clarity better than in decades. His data crushed her claims. The state dismissed her complaint in record time. By now, Margaret's reputation was in tatters. Neighbors who once praised her began apologizing for supporting her. Parents told me they were grateful their kids could fish off the dock without fear of it being torn down. Even some of the newer families, the ones who had bought into the exclusive community sales pitch, started warming up, bringing over pies and saying things like, "We moved here for peace, not drama." Still, Margaret had one last card to play. One crisp November morning, a black SUV rolled up my driveway. Out stepped Margaret in a wool coat, hair perfectly styled despite the wind. She carried a thick envelope and slapped it on my porch table. $55,000, she said coldly. Cash offer. Sign the deed over. Walk away. And this all ends. I blinked at her. You're offering to buy me out, after all this? She crossed her arms. This dock is a liability. You're a liability. Sell. and save yourself the trouble. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Lady, this dock isn't for sale, and neither am I. Her eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. She spun on her heel, climbed back into the SUV, and roared off, gravel spitting from her tires. Sarah came out from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. What was that? I picked up the envelope, still sitting on the table, and shoved it back toward the road. That, I muttered, was desperation. The community heard about it within hours. News spreads fast in small towns. And instead of dividing us, it united us even more. People were outraged. She thinks she can just buy people off Mrs. Hernandez exclaimed at a board meeting. We're not for sale. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It had become everyone's. Winter settled in. Snow blanketed the pines. The lake froze solid. And kids skated where they used to swim. For the first time in a long while, Willow Lake felt at peace. But peace is fragile. And when Margaret felt her grip slipping, she struck again. Deputy Harris showed up at my place one January morning, hat in his hand. Dan, we finally traced the payment for the dam sabotage. My stomach tightened, and he looked me square in the eye. It came from Margaret's account. There it was. Proof. The smoking gun. Harris sighed. She's being charged. Won't be prison, but she'll face fines. Maybe restitution. At the very least, she'll be barred from serving on any HOA board again. I sat back, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for months. Finally, justice. That night, I walked the dock under a blanket of stars, breath fogging in the cold air. I laid my hand on the railing and whispered, We did it. Grandpa, we kept it standing. The cedar creaked beneath my boots, steady and sure. For the first time, I believed this battle was truly ending. But as I looked out across the frozen lake, I also knew the story of Willow Lake wasn't just about fighting off one bully. It was about remembering that neighbors, when united, are stronger than fear. And that truth, I promised myself, would outlast even the sturdiest dock. By February, word spread through Willow Lake faster than snow melt in spring. Margaret had been charged. The county clerk's bulletin listed it plain as day criminal mischief, attempted sabotage, and conspiracy to defraud. Folks who had once feared her now whispered her name with something closer to pity than anger. Guess the queen finally lost her crown, Walt muttered, reading the paper over his morning coffee at Murphy's General. But even with her facing charges, I couldn't shake the habit of glancing over my shoulder. Months of harassment had left their mark. Every car that slowed near our driveway made my stomach clench. Sarah kept reminding me, It's over, Dan, and I'd nod. But deep down I knew bullies rarely leave without trying one last swing. Meanwhile, life around Willow Lake was blooming again. The new board wasted no time turning things around. They froze all pending fines, opened the books for public review, and created what they called the Community Fund. Instead of threatening liens, the fund offered small grants to help people fix roofs, repaint sheds, or buy supplies after storms. Mrs. Hernandez, whose grandson's bike had once triggered a violation, received help to repair her porch steps. First time in years, I feel like this place cares about me, she told the crowd at the March meeting, her eyes misty. Even the skeptical newcomers, the ones who had bought into glossy brochures about exclusive living, began to see the difference. Instead of stiff cocktail parties, neighbors hosted fish fries and potlucks. One family organized a sledding day for the kids, and half the community turned up with hot chocolate. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. The dock, too, became more than just mine. One sunny afternoon in April, a couple from out of town visited. The young man approached me, nervously holding a ring box in his pocket. "Sir," he said, voice shaking, "would you mind if I propose to my girlfriend out there? Folks told me this dock has history." I smiled, my throat tight. "Son, that's exactly what it's for." So I watched from the porch as he led her out onto the planks, dropped to one knee, and asked. She said yes. "Of course." Tears sparkling in the sunlight. Cheers rose from friends hiding nearby with cameras. That night, I walked the dock alone, touched the rail, and whispered, "Still doing your job, old friend." By summer, the bridge between past and present grew stronger. The County Historical Society returned, this time with a camera crew. They filmed interviews with longtime residents, collected photos, and officially cataloged the Miller Dock as a heritage landmark. The new board held a dedication ceremony. A small crowd gathered. Music floated from a neighbor's guitar, and kids ran barefoot across the planks. At the center, they unveiled a bronze plaque. Miller Dock, built 1949, preserved for community and history. The applause that followed was louder than thunder. Sarah leaned against me and whispered, "Your granddad would be proud." I swallowed hard. I hope so. But just as the lake settled into peace, Margaret reared up one last time. Her glass-box mansion finally sold in July, but before she left town, she filed a civil suit against the HOA, claiming her recall had been illegitimate and that she was owed damages for loss of reputation. It was laughable. Rebecca, our attorney, shredded it line by line. The judge dismissed it with prejudice, meaning she couldn't file again. When the gavel came down, Walt leaned over and whispered, "That sound you hear, that's the door slamming shut." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Life slowly turned ordinary again, but better than ordinary. We started new traditions, a summer fish fry by the lake, a fall harvest festival, a winter chili cook-off. People who had once avoided each other now shared recipes, traded tools, and laughed together. For me, the dock became less of a battleground and more of a gathering place again. Children fished, couples strolled, neighbors paused to talk, and every morning, I still walked out with my coffee, listened to the planks creak beneath my boots, and felt gratitude. One evening in late August, I sat out there watching the sun sink, painting the water gold. Sarah joined me, her hand warm in mine. "You think it's really over now?" she asked softly. I looked out at the lake, at the plaque gleaming faintly, at the laughter drifting from a neighbor's porch. "Yeah," I said, "it's over, and we're stronger for it." I knew Margaret might stir up trouble somewhere else, but she no longer had power here. Willow Lake had remembered what mattered, neighbors standing together. And the dock, our dock, had stood the test of storms, sabotage, and schemes. It would keep standing long after we were gone. But let me ask you this. What would you do if your HOA came after your memories? If they told you your history didn't fit the aesthetic? Would you bow your head and tear it down, or would you fight until the truth stood stronger than their rules? Because me, I fought, and I'd do it again. September rolled in with the kind of crisp mornings that make the lake steam like a pot of coffee. The chaos of the past year was finally settling. But I'll admit, I still carried the tension like a knot in my shoulders. You don't spend months fighting an HOA tyrant without some scars. Even if most are invisible. One Saturday, Sarah nudged me out of bed. "Come on," she said. "The board's putting together a cleanup day. You've been carrying this whole neighborhood on your back for months. Let them carry you for once." I grumbled, but went anyway. And I'm glad I did. Half the town showed up, kids with trash bags, teens hauling brush, Walt running a chainsaw like it was an extension of his arm. Miss Hernandez made tamales for everyone. We worked side by side, sweating, laughing, teasing. By noon, the shoreline looked better than it had in decades. Standing there, rake in hand, I realized this is what community feels like. Not fear of fines, not paranoia about aesthetic compliance, just people helping people. Later that fall, the board launched something new, Heritage Day. The idea was simple: celebrate what made Willow Lake more than just property lines. Families brought old photos, shared stories of camping trips, fishing adventures, and blizzards survived. The Historical Society set up a little booth with displays about the dock's history, complete with that black and white picture of my grandfather hammering nails in 1949. Kids painted rocks to line the trail. A neighbor strummed guitar by the fire pit. At sunset, everyone gathered on the dock itself. Someone lit lanterns. And for a moment, the lake glowed like it was holding its breath. Carla, end quote, end quote. The board chairwoman spoke. "This dock isn't just Daniel's, it's ours. A reminder that what connects us is stronger than what divides us." The crowd clapped, and I felt my throat tighten. I'd spent months defending this dock like it was a fortress. Now it was a symbol of unity. Of course, Margaret wasn't entirely gone. Word trickled back that she'd moved to another state, Florida, I think, and was already trying to wiggle her way into another HOA board. Poor souls down there didn't know what storm was coming. Walt yoked. "Maybe we should send him a warning letter." I shook my head. Nah, they'll find out soon enough. Still, I couldn't help but hope that somewhere down the line, she'd run into another stubborn homeowner who refused to bow. As winter approached, life finally felt normal again. Snow blanketed the pines. Kids sledded down the hill by the church. And Sarah and I spent evenings by the fire with Coco instead of stress. One night, I asked her, "Do you ever wish we'd just caved, tore the dock down, avoided all this mess?" She looked at me like I'd grown two heads. "Daniel Miller, if you'd done that, you wouldn't be you, and this community wouldn't be what it is now." She was right. The fight had been brutal, but it had reshaped Willow Lake into something better. By spring, the dock had become a destination. Couples took engagement photos there. Fishermen swapped stories leaning on the rail. The county even added it to a brochure about local history. One afternoon, I spotted initials freshly carved into the cedar, J+A. 2023. Instead of being angry, I smiled. That's what the dock was for. New stories written on old wood. Looking back, it's almost funny. Margaret thought tearing down the dock would boost property values. Instead, preserving it made this neighborhood more valuable than she ever imagined, not in dollars, but in dignity, trust, and belonging. Now every morning, I step out onto those creaking planks with my coffee, watch the mist curl over the water, and whisper a thank you, not just to my grandfather, but to every neighbor who stood up when it mattered. Because here's the truth, an HOA can fine you, threaten you, even try to break you. But they can't erase your history unless you let them. So I'll ask you, what would you do if they came after your story? Would you surrender, or would you stand? Stubborn as cedar. Until the storm passes, spring rolled into summer, and Willow Lake felt more alive than I'd ever seen it. The water sparkled clean, kids splashed off docks, and laughter carried across the shoreline. For once, the sound wasn't punctuated by muttered complaints about fines or arguments over mailbox paint. The new board kept proving its worth. They held open meetings with folding chairs in the community center, where anyone could speak without fear of being shut down. Instead of nitpicking, they focused on real needs, patching the potholes on Pine Hollow Road, fixing the lights near the boat launch, helping older neighbors clear their gutters. One evening, at a meeting that drew nearly the whole neighborhood, Carla asked for ideas to make Willow Lake better. Suggestions flew: a community garden, a shared tool library, a summer concert series. Folks weren't scared anymore, they were excited. I sat near the back, arms crossed, watching with quiet pride. A year ago, this same room had been ruled with a gavel and a glare. Now it felt like family. The dock, meanwhile, had become the beating heart of our town. On warm nights, teenagers dangled their legs over the edge, whispering secrets. Anglers cast lines at dawn, their breath rising like smoke in the morning chill. Couples posed for anniversary photos, holding hands where Sarah and I once stood decades ago. And every so often, strangers stopped by. They'd heard about the dock that beat the HOA. Some just wanted to see it, others to hear the story. I never minded telling it. Built in 1949, I'd start patting the rail. Survived storms, sabotage, and even a queen who thought she could erase it, still standing. Their eyes always widened. Some nodded thoughtfully. Others laughed in disbelief. But they all left understanding one thing: this wasn't just wood. It was proof that ordinary people can win when they stand together. By midsummer, the board launched the first official Heritage Festival. Booths lined the grassy park near the water. Kids painted murals. Musicians played fiddles and guitars. And food. Oh, the food sprawled across tables: pies, barbecue, corn roasted right on the cob. At sunset, everyone gathered on the dock. Carla stepped forward with a microphone. This dock is more than Daniel's family story. It's all of ours now. A reminder that we're not just neighbors. We're a community. She handed me the mic. I'm no public speaker, but I cleared my throat and said, all I did was refuse to tear down my grandfather's work. The rest, that was you, all of you choosing to fight for each other. The applause rolled like thunder across the lake. But life has a funny way of testing peace. In August, a letter arrived, not from Margaret, thank God, but from a developer. They were scouting land near Willow Lake, looking to build a resort on the far side. The glossy flyer promised modern lakeside luxury. The room grew tense at the next meeting. Nobody wanted another battle. But this time, we weren't starting from fear. We've been here before, Walt said, standing tall with his gruff voice. We know how to fight smart, and we know how to stand together. Heads nodded all around. The difference between now and last year was night and day. We weren't scattered neighbors anymore, we were united. One cool September night, I walked the dock alone. The air smelled like pine and smoke from a distant campfire. I thought about everything. The fines, the lawsuits, the sabotage, The long meetings and longer nights. And I thought about how it all ended with neighbors closer than ever. With a dock recognized as a landmark. With bullies chased out by truth. I rested my hand on the rail and whispered, "You made it, Grandpa." And so did we. The boards creaked softly, like an old friend answering back. But here's the question I leave for anyone listening. What would you do if an HOA told you to tear down your memories, if they threatened your peace, your family's history, your sense of home? Would you let them, or would you fight? Plank by plank, day by day, until your story stood stronger than their rules. Because I'll tell you this, fighting isn't easy. But losing who you are, that costs more than any fine. October brought crisp mornings, the kind that turn the lake into glass and paint the maples red and gold. I carried my coffee out to the dock, the boards groaning underfoot, and felt for the first time in what seemed like forever peace. Real peace. No more envelopes stuffed with threats. No more whispered rumors about non-compliance. Just me, the lake, and the memories stitched into every plank. But the fight had left its mark. I'd changed. My neighbors had changed. We no longer saw the HOA as some untouchable authority. We saw it for what it should have been all along, a service, not a throne. That winter, the board voted to enshrine a new principle in our bylaws. No HOA rule shall erase history or threaten community bonds. It was written plain and simple, without the lawyerly jargon Margaret used to hide behind. For the first time, I actually smiled reading HOA paperwork. In December, we hosted the first Winter Lights Festival. Families strung lanterns along the trail to the dock. Hot cocoa flowed like water, and kids built snowmen on the frozen shoreline. At dusk, everyone gathered on the dock. The lanterns reflected in the ice, glowing like stars that had fallen just close enough to touch. I looked around at faces lit by that gentle light. Walt with his easy grin. Carla beaming with pride. Kids bundled up and laughing, and I felt the kind of warmth no fire can give. Sarah nudged me. "Worth it?" she asked softly. I swallowed hard, eyes stinging. Every fight, every sleepless night, worth it 100 times over. Come spring, the County Historical Society returned again, this time with a bigger announcement. Not only was the Miller Dock recognized locally, it was being nominated for the state's historic registry. The representative handed me a certificate. And for once, I couldn't find words. All I could do was run my hand over the rough cedar rail. The same one my grandfather nailed in place in 1949, and whisper, "You're official now, old friend." The crowd clapped, and I swear I felt the boards hum under our feet. Proud as any monument. By summer, the story had traveled farther than our little lake. A regional newspaper ran a feature titled "The Dock That Defied the HOA." Then came phone calls from neighbors in other towns, people living their own versions of this nightmare. "Mr. Miller," one man said on the phone, "they fined me for planting tomatoes in my front yard. Hearing your story gave me hope." I told him what I tell you now, hope's not enough. You've got to stand up. Gather your neighbors. Know the bylaws better than the bullies do. And never, ever sell your memories. The years ahead won't be perfect. There will always be storms. Always be new challenges. Developers will circle. Rules will be tested. Personalities will clash. That's life. But now, Willow Lake knows who it is. We've been through the fire together, and we came out stronger. And me, every morning. I still walk the dock with my coffee, The cedar creaks beneath me, steady as a heartbeat. I pause at the center, where my grandfather once stood, where my father taught me knots, where I asked Sarah for forever, and I whisper a quiet vow. As long as I'm here, you're safe. Because this dock isn't just wood, it's a story. Our story. So, let me ask you, friend, what would you do if your HOA told you to erase your history? If they threatened the very thing that makes your house a home? Would you cave or would you stand stubborn? Like cedar against a storm, until the truth finally won. Drop your answer. Share your story. 'Cause if there's one thing I've learned, it's that when neighbors fight together, no HOA bully in the world can tear down what really matters.